Hi, I'm Marvin from the Rebuilding Faith online community. I joined the community because I became disillusioned with the church and its members, talking and acting nothing like the Christ they claim to follow. The best part about my experience in the community has been discovering that I'm not alone in the way I feel and that others understand and feel the same way too.
Welcome to another episode of Cabernet Pray, where we sip the wine and we stir the faith. And today we've got an incredible guest. We've got Diana Butler Bass. She is an award-winning author of 11 books. She has a PhD from Duke University. She's a speaker, a preacher, and a trusted commentator on religion and contemporary spirituality. She currently writes The Cottage, which is one of the most widely read Substack newsletters. And for those of you watching on video, she's got The Cottage on her wine glass. If you notice that, and if you're on audio, you can just know that detail. It's pretty cool. And she is someone I have read her books for years now. We've been going through her book, Freeing Jesus, in our online community, for those of you who are in that. And just an incredible thought leader, someone who brings out the beauty and the tradition of Christianity in ways that you often don't hear. And so I'm so excited for you to get to hear her perspective today. This is episode 59, A Beautiful Year.
I've never shared this with anybody publicly. There's so many things happen in this conversation right now. 1,000 years from now, people are going to be looking at this podcast saying, so this was the breakthrough.
If this was SportsCenter, that would be like such a hot take. Skip Bayless would have no idea. Stephen A. Smith would have no idea what to say if you drop that down. That is so good.
The joke I always say is like, how'd you learn so much? You got to drink a lot.
The power of food and beverage to lubricate an environment.
Resistance to change is hurting the church.
I'm not in the camp that God has a penis or a vagina or a body at all. I'm in the camp that God is a universal spirit.
This is the strangest podcast that I have been on. I don't even know what to do.
I'm kind of geeked up about this wine.
So this is my second glass, and it delivers a little more of a punch than I expected. So if I get a little loopy, it's your fault. You told me to drink on the show.
I will also say as a confession, I am a lightweight. So I've had like 3 sips of this wine and I'm already feeling it. So this is fun.
You've uncovered the mystery. You've exposed the formula.
You've just duct taped together a number of things that aren't normally hanging out together, and I'm here for it.
We're going to sit down at a table, we're going to have a glass of wine and some food, and we're going to talk about the beauty of Jesus.
Thank you for the hospitality that this particular podcast provides folks like myself, and I know others, to be curious around their faith practices.
I really appreciate this venue, what you're doing. It is fun, and yet you dig into the deep stuff.
I've heard about your podcast for a long time, and I love that you're a pastor and that you explore the world of faith through wine. That's very unique.
I will never forget the first time I bought a bottle of wine by myself, which was yesterday.
If you're familiar with drunk history, I thought it's like drunk theology. So I
got a little spicy there. It's the peach wine.
Apparently the wine is, here we are. Queer we are. Beer we are. No, it's wine, Jeremy.
By the way, drinking this Pinot Grigio at 3 o'clock in the afternoon is making me even more direct in my communication than I normally would be.
I know why you have your guests drink wine. It makes sense now. Yeah, I get it. A little bit of liquid courage to really unleash the beast.
I think you've got a good podcast. So throw in the wine bit in there. That's nice. That's it. Cabernet Pray, yeah.
Welcome to the podcast, Diana Butler Bass.
Hey, thanks for having me, Jeremy. I've never been on a Wine and Pray podcast before, so I'm loving this.
Oh, we're gonna explore some new things today, and you have been a key voice for a lot of us for a long time, and so I'm very excited for this conversation. But before we dive into all the good theology, we got to talk about what we're drinking first. And so I'll begin. I'll share what's in my glass, and then we'll see what you've got. Today, I am going to an old world wine region. I've got a 2020 Famiglia Rivetti Barbaresco. This is a Nebbiolo grape. This is just beautiful. I've been enjoying. It's morning as I'm recording this, so I don't normally drink in the morning unless I'm doing a podcast. But I do enough of these where it's not that unusual. But this is a medium to full body, high tannin, high acidity, And I'm loving this wine because it's got a great mix of a variety of flavors. So I'm getting cherry and cranberry, some of those fruit notes, but then also like a leather note with it that adds a little bit more just mouthfeel to it. And it's really fun. So I'm enjoying this. It's offering a lot. What have you got in your glass today?
Well, I took you really seriously. And so I have a 2022 Cabernet from Dow Vineyards in Central Coast of California. And I have to confess that I haven't had very much of it yet, but when I took my first taste, there was a kind of very fruity and very peppery sense to it, which was very nice. And also, for me, I spent significant part of my life in the Central Coast of California. So I know what these wines taste like, and they bring back just this rush of memories.
Oh, I love that.
And so I feel a little bit like, wow, home. I can taste the earth of the Central Coast in my glass.
Wow, that was incredible. What a great explanation for your wine. So cheers to you, Diana. Cheers to all of our listeners. If you are able to enjoy a glass with us, and hopefully you're not driving, but if you are able to enjoy one, cheers to you as well. All right, Diana, this is our first time talking, but I just got to tell you, I feel like we're kindred spirits already, and I'll explain to you why. We've been going through your book, Freeing Jesus, in our online community, and I think I think the first book I ever read of yours was Grounded years ago. Loved it. Ended up creating a whole sermon series around it because I thought the ideas were so cool. Then recently, I thought, hey, this Freeing Jesus book would be really fun to go through with our online community. So we've been doing that, and love the way that you invite people to experience Jesus in a variety of different roles in that book. But you have this line that is probably so like nerdy for most people, and they just read over it and think like, I don't even know what she's talking about. This like struck something deep in me, and I realized like I want to be friends with you. So here's your line from the book Freeing Jesus that again is probably not one of your main ideas, but like is when I realized I really resonated. You say this: I so wanted to be orthodox, but I secretly believed Augustine the villain and Pelagius the hero. Now, that is like a throwaway line for most people, but let me tell you why that resonated with me. I remember when I was in seminary for my master's, and we were doing a church history course, and they're going through these, old school theologians that I hadn't heard of at that point. And one of the classes was on Pelagius. So they're explaining Pelagius, and I remember thinking, I love this guy. Like, I love the way this guy thinks. And like something inside of me was stirring. And I'm like, yes, like, why have I never heard about this guy? And so like the professor's, teaching about him. And then the professor gets this concluding thought. And she goes, yeah. And then Pelagius was labeled a heretic and, was ostracized. And I don't remember if he was killed or whatever happened to him. And I remember like my heart just sunk when I was like, oh no, I like the heretics, and it was this very lonely feeling. So when I got I wanted to be Orthodox, but I never really liked Augustine. I can't stand Augustine. I mean, the more I've studied him, the more issues I have. So I don't know. Is that a throwaway line, or are we kindred spirits here?
I think we're kindred spirits. Occasionally I will write a subtweet of something that's happened online. And for years over on Twitter, I had this really big Twitter account. It's just locked now because I can't stand going over there. But I had this really...
Things have changed over there.
They really have. But for years, people were constantly attacking me because they called me Pelagian and all this sort of stuff. And that I was really a heretic because I didn't love Augustine. And I'm going, yeah, that's right. So please go ahead, whatever, burn me at the stake. And I put that in the book because that's the truth. And it's often the truth of my theological sort of autobiography that I've liked the people who were the outsiders. I've liked the people who were asking questions. I've liked the people who, as one friend of mine says, Diana, none of your heroes died comfortably in their own beds.
Ooh, that's good.
Yeah. They were all jailed or somehow dispatched otherwise by the church, exiled. And so I like people like that. That's okay. That's good.
Have you had anybody else make a comment about that line in that book or anything else similar to that? Do you get reactions to that?
I don't think I have. I think you're the first person to ever really hold that one up, and that makes me like you.
It's because it struck something so deep within me. That was my own journey there. I love it.
Well, I'm very glad when other people have those kinds of moments and they go, yes, this can be a friend of mine. And that's great. I'm happy for that too. That means you wouldn't have attacked me on Twitter.
I most certainly would not have. In fact, I remember in probably the same class or a different session of it, I remember coming to this conclusion, which was a bizarre conclusion, where it was so clear to me, if I would have lived in the times that I was studying, the church would have killed me, right. And it was this realization of like, I would have been the one that would have been on the stake, or, and it was just like a kind of a sobering reality of like, oh, the church really hasn't embraced a lot of these ideas and has had a very narrow understanding. And even today, when people, I get beat up in social media over orthodoxy, and, I also want to tell people, like, orthodoxy is often decided by who wins, by how, who has the majority, who has the influence and the power, not necessarily who has the most beautiful ideas. And right. I think it's helpful to understand that when we're following Jesus, I'd rather go for beautiful ideas that, stir something in me and I go, holy cow, I've never seen anything like that.
Yeah. To me, I will, there are pieces of even some of the really famous and very orthodox people that I think are beautiful, but they aren't generally held up. And I wrote a book several years ago, before the ones that you mentioned. It was called A People's History of Christianity. And in that book, I talked about things that I actually liked, that Calvin had said. Calvin wrote beautifully about nature. And yet, in the quest for sort of Calvinist orthodoxy, that's often been a part of Calvin that has been completely dismissed. Let's not talk about his ideas of nature and the beauties of nature and what we learn from the theater of God's Spirit. But instead, let's talk about double predestination. So I think it's pretty easy for people to sort of zero in on 2 or 3 things and say, you have to believe this, just like Augustine did, or you have to believe this, just like Luther said, or Calvin, or what have you. And they're always men, and they're almost always white men. And so it's like these certain points of what the thread of the great tradition is. If you don't believe those, you're out. And what's fascinating, of course, is that we've missed thousands and thousands and thousands, if not millions, of opportunities to hear the Christian story through other angles that may have emerged as very important and meaningful and necessary for telling the full story. Right. And so I was trained in history and taught that for years and taught historical theology. And I always would teach my students to, look towards the edges, look towards even the people are acceptable. Look towards the parts of them that are the lesser known narratives, and see what you see there. And sometimes you see things that are bad that has sort of been hidden by church history, like Jonathan Edwards. I don't remember how old I was before I learned that he held slaves. I was well through graduate school by that point, and nobody ever really bothered to tell me that, and what kind of impact that might have on a particular theological tradition that's venerated right now in some circles. And so you sometimes learn bad things about a person that has a capacity to reinterpret the whole canon of that person. And sometimes you learn something good, like Calvin on nature. And you think to yourself, gosh, nobody ever told me that Calvin liked birds that sing. That's kind of nice. I'll invite him over to sit in my garden with me,
He's maybe not all bad.
Right. Maybe he's not all bad. And so that's, I guess, I'm all for theological complexity in the right ways. And that, of course, does mean well, when you look at Pelagius, instead of looking at the things that Augustine said was wrong with Pelagius, which is the main way we heard about Pelagius, was only through the person who hated him the most, we should probably look to what we know or suspect that he really said himself. And there you see a different character emerge.
It reminds me what you're saying. I remember when I learned about Martin Luther's anti-Semitism.
Right.
And that was one of those, I had never been told that, so I had been told this, here was Martin Luther, this great reformer and all the things that, he did for the church. And then I was probably in my late 20s before I ever came across like, holy cow, what about all this other stuff that he said that is incredibly problematic? Why are we not talking about that? And it is interesting what we share of church history, what we don't share. And I just wish, and I would imagine you feel the same, that more people in churches were actually exposed to Christian tradition, because what they have, the ideas they have are only the ones that have been passed on, not all these other ones that you learn about once you start opening up these doors.
Yeah, and I think in certain ways that's been the quest, the search of my whole career, or I don't know what you want to call it, vocation is probably a better word, vocation of teaching and writing, is to find those unusual things, to put forth the lesser known stories and to share those and to let people hear something that's surprising and more life-giving than they might have otherwise heard. Because a lot of people, now, and I don't blame anybody for this at all, is that they don't want to have anything to do with the sort of Christianity that descends from Augustine through Calvin, through the, sort of the, what I call the big C Christianity, the Great Command, or the Great Commission, and this kind of Christianity that's all about control and certainty, probably the biggest C of all. And that kind of Christianity, that's mutated in the United States into this thing we call Christian nationalism right now. And if that's the Christianity that you think is in the Bible, you're not reading the Bible very well. And you also don't know the tradition very well, because you're only looking at one side of it. And it is there. The tradition has violence and corruption and complicity with empire and all those things. But it also has protest. And just for the record, people like myself who grew up Methodist, people I think like who grew up in your church too, were Protestants. And that means that protest is in our first name.
Yeah. It's part of our history.
That's right. It's like, if you're angry at protesters right now, you better look in the mirror.
Yeah, I love that.
Because that's who Methodists and Baptists and free church people are, is that we're protesters. We're protesters against the powerful, and we're protesters against the status quos of theology. And if you're not out on the street making noises right now about the love of Jesus and acceptance of all people, you're probably not really following the tradition as much as you think you are.
It's a good word. I like it. Okay, before we get into your latest book, there's a question I love to ask people to give our listeners a little bit of your journey in a snapshot. And so I like to just pick the last 10 years. How has your faith changed in the last 10 years? So what has the more recent journey been for you as you've been experiencing God?
I can answer that. I don't think anybody's asked me that question. And I love it because I am way more relaxed about what it means to be a Christian than I ever have been before. And what I mean by that is I'm in my early 60s, and I sort of figured out that life is hard, and it's really, 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 really difficult to find joy in this life and to be a good and loving person. And as I look around at my friends and people I work with and the world around me, I just have developed this great capacity to be far more open to pathways of authenticity and joy wherever they manifest themselves. And so I'm really quite relaxed about all kinds of stuff that people get really uptight about. I'm in a mode where it's like, where you find God, what gives you joy, and what makes you a more loving and decent human being. And those are things that I think that Jesus cared about. And I certainly care about them. And so I think that, is there a word we can call that? Relaxed Christianity, not uptight Christianity.
I love that. Yeah.
Something. And so there are things I just don't get all my knickers in a twist about anymore.
You know, it reminds me, I remember, so I came from a very traditional evangelical, more conservative space. And as I started reading people like you and books that were a little bit outside my tradition, which, as you're saying, you know, started introducing ideas. This was in my 20s, you know, introducing ideas that I hadn't really heard even in seminary. I remember there was people around me started getting concerned, you know, and the feedback was, hey, some of these people, just so you know, like, they're considered heretics. And I remember being told that numerous times. And then oftentimes I would either read the book, or in a number of situations, I got a chance to meet the person. And I remember every time thinking, if that's what a heretic looks like, sign me up. Because they look like Jesus, they have a joy that looks like Jesus, you know, and it was like the demeanor that I was finding. Then I would go to the people who were not considered heretics, and they looked angry and, you know, bitter and just nasty. And I remember thinking, like, if we took all the ideas off the table and just said, which person do you want to be more like? Which temperament? You know, and it was like, I don't want to be the angry, wrathful, red in the face Christian all the time. I want to be the person that looks like Jesus and is forgiving people and has a kindness, you know, and it wasn't in the people that I was told were the safe ones. But I love your answer, because your answer is basically saying, like, yeah, I've just learned how to settle into this space. And I think it is a direct result of a lot of the theology that you have fostered for your whole life.
Well, it also comes from, I think, that reading the Bible as much as I do, which is a kind of a crazy thing to say, because so many people, I could never read the Bible very well when I was an evangelical, partly because there were expectations not just to read the Bible, but you had to get to the right conclusions about reading the Bible. And so I just never could get to the right conclusions. I was literally like always running off on these flights of imagination about what the stories meant differently, or asking questions that were not permitted, especially for a woman to ask. And so I just kind of gave up. It was like, oh, this is a hopeless task. Why would anybody want to read this book? It's all narrow and it's predetermined what you're going to think about it. But then to return to the Bible really more around the time I was in my late 40s, and to spend more and more reading time in it and devotional time in it that I do now, and especially time in preparing sermons when I preach. That is a deep gift that the church gives to its preachers, the ability to spend that kind of time in the passages, and to have fun with Scripture and to really let it sing to you. And I guess I've always been impressed by the fact that one of the critiques about Jesus is that he has all the wrong people to dinner all the time, you know. And why, you know, you can't hang around with that guy because look at who he invites to his dinner table. He's friends with all tax collectors and sinners. And I realized, you know, that'd be kind of a nice dinner party. And yeah. And that's what I wanted to do. I mean, I'd rather be having conversations with the tax collectors and the sinners than the hyper orthodox that I spent some significant time of my 20s and early 30s around, when I didn't like myself, when I was trying to be like them. And I write about that in Freeing Jesus. The 5th chapter is the chapter of my descent into hyper orthodoxy. And when I had every right opinion that I needed to have in order to be accepted by the powers that be. And the further I went down that road, the more I realized that I was walking away from Jesus, and that I was walking away from myself, and I was walking away from the people who loved me. And I looked at myself in the mirror one day and I said, I don't know what to do here. Either I wind up being kind of this monstrous narrow bigot who isn't, and that's not who I am. I knew I wasn't that person, but I sure did I put on a good show of it. Either I walk away from this or this is just the path for the rest of my life. And I literally turned around and went back to where I'd gotten off track and started again. And lost a lot of friends, lost my first marriage, lost the regard of some people who had been good mentors to me, and had to set out a different course. And so I really truly understand when that happens, and my heart and my friendship is always extended to people who find themselves in similar positions.
Well, I'm glad you reading the Bible has led to that, because a lot of people who read the Bible don't go that direction.
No,
so
they really don't.
I don't necessarily just say, just read your Bible more and you'll automatically look more like Jesus, because unfortunately, I have not found that to be the case. But all right, let's dive in to your book. What I want to do, so the latest book's called A Beautiful Year, and I'll get to a couple quotes that I think summarize the premise of this well. I want to read, I got a handful of quotes from here, and what I love to do on these is just read something that stood out to me and then let you react to it. So these are your words, but they struck a chord with me, and then the fun part of getting to interview an author is you get to read a book and then experience it with the author and go, hey, I really like this, like, ad lib on this. And so we'll see what you think about these ideas. So you have a great setup, I think, to what is this book about? You say this: as an American, I live in a country that can't seem to decide what time it is. Do we live in a season of new freedoms, the extension of democracy and rights, increased dignity for all Americans? Or do we live in a time like the end of the Roman Republic, when traditions and institutions of democracy were replaced by authoritarian rule? Are we gaining or losing?
Yeah, it's a good set of questions, isn't it?
I was like, yep, highlight. That's how I feel.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's why a lot of people feel lost right now. And that's what I hear all the time around me, is that people saying, I don't understand. I don't understand. We were going this way, and now we appear to be going this way. What's happening here? And so I try to provide... I don't know if I've tried to provide answers to the question. I don't think I really do, because I don't have any real answers to the question. But what I do try to provide is a regrounding of people in an alternative vision of time, so that the questions can change. So instead of us creating kind of us versus them questions that sets up more conflict and more hatred and more inability to solve problems, I'm trying to create a different framework so that people of goodwill, of which I do believe there still are many, can enter into a different kind of space. And so the space I offer up becomes this reintroduction or first-time introduction with the idea of a Christian year. And the Christian year being an anti-imperial, anti-militarist, and anti-capitalist framework for time that emphasizes love, mercy, forgiveness, humility, justice, kindness, and peace. And what does it mean to live? If we really lived that, if we really lived that calendar, if we really lived those stories, how would those stories change the question?
And what I love about that is I don't come from that tradition. So I never have gone through the liturgical year. I've always watched it from afar. It's been something I've studied or dipped my toe in if I'm visiting a church for, a weekend and they're going through it or something. So this whole premise was very interesting to me, to really orient myself into a different rhythm. And you have this other quote that I thought was such a great contrast of what our two choices are. You say, our secular calendar is a cycle of work and consumerism, nationalism and military prowess, and status and political power. Occasionally we get a rest on a federal holiday for a sporting event or a vacation. And even just the way you painted that, I was like, oh, that is our, you know what I mean? Like I hadn't thought of the calendar the way you just succinctly kind of like, this is what that is. But then you say the liturgical calendar mostly ignores all this. It eschews wealth, privilege, violence, and achievement. Instead, through its cycles, it tells a strangely compelling story of anticipation, peace and justice, enlightenment, failure and death, rebirth, and living in love. Its foundation is a weekly day of rest, a Sabbath. And you wrote this. I think your hope would be that someone would read it a chapter a week, or I don't know, you refer to them as chapters, but a reading a week, and you've kind of laid it out like that. I didn't read that in preparation for this. I pounded through the book, but if someone was reading like that, how do you envision inviting them into this other kind of calendar that's very different than the schedule we've all got used to?
Well, I think that the way I put the book together, I hoped that it made sense in a single or a few settings, that a person could read it like a book and go, oh my gosh, there's an entirely different quilt of existence that is out here and that I never knew that I could, rest under, that I could be part of, this fabric of a story. So that's a possible way of reading it. It's also possible to read it seasonally because I set it up along the seasons of the Christian year. So oftentimes, we have tons of beautiful books about spirituality of seasons, and some of those books even take the 4 seasons themselves and look at all 4 in a single book. And you can read those seasonally, or you could read them, kind of together. But this is really structured weekly. So that's sort of the ultimate thing, is it's almost like a weekly book to have at your bedside, and you can pick this up at any time during the year and just say, oh, what was the reading this week? Where did the biblical reading take us? And I think that for our purposes here, it's really helpful to know that that's how I wrote the book. I didn't sit down and write it in a single, sort of writing period, a couple 6 weeks or 3 months or what have you. I wrote this book over 3 years. Oh, and what I was doing was following the liturgical calendar. So I was following these seasons, and the seasons are Advent, Christmas, Epiphany, Lent, and then I pull out the week right before Easter, which is kind of almost like a season to itself, Holy Week, and then Easter, and then Pentecost, Pentecost is the longest season of the year. And so what I was doing is that I had, during the pandemic, started a newsletter on a platform that nobody had ever heard of at the time, Substack. And I just began writing in order to connect with my readers, because I couldn't go out and preach. I couldn't go out and do workshops. I couldn't go out and teach. So I was doing it from my office here, the very room that I'm sitting in right now. And I decided to follow those seasons, and then the seasons are accompanied by, in more liberal and mainline churches like the Episcopal Church and the Liberal Lutheran Church and the big Presbyterian Church and the Catholic Church even, they follow a thing called a lectionary, which is a plate of readings that is established years in advance that takes congregations through the Bible on a seasonal basis and matches Bible stories to the themes of the season. And the lectionary runs in a 3-year cycle. And the most commonly used one is something called the Revised Common Lectionary. And it's easy to access. You can go and look up Revised Common Lectionary, and there's a beautiful version of it that's hosted by Vanderbilt University. And if you just go there, you can see what the readings are for every single week for the next 3 years. And so that's what I was doing during the pandemic. I would go to the lectionary in a particular season, and I would write a reflection for that week that were for this group of people that had signed up for this crazy newsletter I just started. And lo and behold, that became the main focus of my newsletter. People loved it. Yeah, people were telling me all the time that they were hearing me say things that they didn't hear in their own churches. People were saying that they'd never thought about the Bible in the ways that I had suggested. I had people writing to me saying, "You gave me my faith back," and I was stunned by the reaction, and it caused the newsletter to grow like topsy, and it became really well received and widely read on Substack, and I'm very, very, very grateful for that. But the real fun part of it is have created a community around these sort of alternate interpretations of Scripture. So that's how the book was birthed through 3 years in conversation with my own readers as I struggled with what they were struggling with, which were oftentimes concerns of not being able to go to church any longer, being angry that the church wasn't being prophetic enough in these difficult days, a lot of the political and social changes. And I've long been an advocate and ally of the LGBTQ community. And so, and I am a feminist. And so, so a lot of my readings come out of engagement with those alternative voices as well. And I was learning, just like so many other white Americans, a ton about racism during that period. And so I think that new awareness of race also began to enter into my capacity of rereading Scripture. So the book itself was written over a long period of time, which is why it can, I think, live as a single standing kind of book that you could enjoy on just like any other book, or it could be savored as a guide through about time, through time.
Yeah. Yeah, and it definitely comes across in the way you write, where you can tell you're writing it in those. I didn't realize it was 3 years. I imagined you took a year and wrote it throughout a year. But it's even cooler to imagine 3 years worth of the same times. You know what I mean? Of all that is kind of that's a cool way to read it. I would imagine a lot of the listeners are not familiar with the lectionary as you've described it. Do you have like a snapshot? Who made this? Who decided this is what the readings are? It's going to be 3 years. When was this kind of decided? Is there agreement on it? What could you speak to, just kind of the history of that to someone that may not be as familiar with this idea of a lectionary?
I'm pretty certain. I have to go and brush up on the history of it myself, but I'm pretty sure it came out of the National Council and the World Council of Churches. And the backbone of the lectionary is, like I said, it's a 3-year cycle. And so every year it emphasizes a different one of the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, or Luke, as the major thrust of that year's telling of the Jesus story. And then it reads John during the special seasons. And so John shows up a lot during Christmas and a lot during Easter. So you get to go through the majority of all 4 of the Gospels, but you do it in this really kind of interesting and unusual way. And you do it, like I said, it's themed towards the particularities of where we are seasonally. And so that's the backbone of it. And then what the other readings that are there's also a reading from the epistles. There's always a reading from the epistles that they feel like somehow matches whatever the gospel reading is. There's a psalm, and you go through the Psalms a lot, obviously, because there's only 30 some, every month you get 30 some of those, and so it's like you just keep spinning through them, and there aren't that many in the whole book. So that's great, and you do get to reread several of the Psalms through the year in worship context, which is wonderful. Psalm 23 shows up a lot in all kinds of different contexts, and I found that interesting through the years. And then there's always a reading from the Hebrew Bible that is paired with it as well. And those are often very interesting, and I've learned how to preach a little bit better from the Old Testament because of that. But that's what the lectionary is. And you would think, that it's kind of maybe a little boring or it would get ritualistic. But I haven't. It stays fresh for me for a lot of different reasons. And, it's not all that different in some ways from, there's all those evangelical reading plans about how you read the Bible in a year or what have you. But the way that this works is simply, reading the Gospels over and over and over again on a 3-year cycle. So you really get the stories of Jesus. Anybody who thinks that in liberal churches you don't read the Bible, they might not read every single bit of stuff that is in the Old Testament. But honestly, any mainliner who has ever been listening to the lectionary read in church knows those stories. They become part of the life of a person who is a serious member of one of those congregations. So it's it comes out of the more liberal Protestant tradition, but it's very ecumenical, and it's not just a North American thing. It is shared literally by churches around the world, and the Catholic Church uses a version of it. So we're talking about the biggest Christian body in the world uses a form of that lectionary with some distinctive modifications that work with Catholic theology.
I think that part is the coolest to me, is to imagine you syncing up with Christians around the world. Not this is what our community is doing, which, has power too, but the idea of our community is syncing up with communities in our country, communities around the world, like this broader Christian movement that we're a part of, I think is a very cool idea. And I think that's, for a lot of people that may not be, that may have my experience where we didn't come from the lectionary, didn't come from that kind of a setting. Your book is maybe the gateway drug into, into something else of like, oh, this is kind of cool. A different way of experiencing the same, like you said, it's the same Bible. It's it's the same basic format. It's just laid out in a unique way with a lot of other Christians. And I think it is a cool invitation into something bigger. And if nothing else, it's a change of pace, to try it for 3 years and see
where it
see if you like it.
And it is really, I think one of the things I loved about it most, at least initially, is that the evangelical version of kind of, Bible reading by these sorts of programmatic structures. That's fine. It's all good. But it's also highly individual. And so you just pointed out what's different about the Revised Standard Lectionary. And there are some other lectionaries which are gaining popularity around the globe as well. But the thing that's really distinctive about it is communal, and it's also worship-based. So it's not just that you're sitting there in the morning trying to sort of summon up, oh gosh, I got to get in the right mood for my Bible study. But it literally is something that you read in the context of worship in community every Sunday, and you have an awareness that other people around the world are reading the same thing.
Yeah, I think we need more. In America, we need more of that idea of how do we think beyond ourselves and what's good for me. And if this can help aid in that, then let's do it. All right. I want to look at a few.
I was going to say real quickly, I love the fact that I've got a lot of readers internationally because of that.
Oh, that's cool.
So, I do write about lots of American social and political issues, but I'm always linking them up to these other stories, and it's literally that people who are my readers in Western Europe, across the English-speaking world, and some countries in Africa, certainly Australia and New Zealand, they're reading the same texts every Sunday.
That's cool.
And so I get this really great engagement from all these different perspectives, and I love it, and it teaches me about what's going on in other parts of the world as well.
Yeah, I love that. All right, I've got a few other quotes I want to look at and have you react to, and this next one is just made me smile. You say, and looking back, I think that December 9th, 1965 may have been the day that I became a theologian. Now, if you're listening to this and you're wondering, what on earth is she writing about that would be that trigger? I would love for you to, I'm not going to spoil it. What were you writing about that was the trigger for the day you became a theologian?
I was watching the first ever broadcast of a Charlie Brown Christmas special.
I love that so much. That's such a great cartoon, and that was the moment for you. You became a theologian.
I wondered about what the meaning of salvation was when Linus got up on the stage and said, "For unto you is born this day a Savior in the city of David, who is Christ the Lord." I thought, what the heck is that guy talking about? It sounded really cool, though. Whatever it was, I wanted to know what he was talking about. So yeah, that was the day for me.
In light of what we've seen in modern times of CBS, I find this very hard to believe that this was ever aired. And you know, I came, obviously, I'm a few years later than this, so I remember my dad telling me about a similar thing, saying that was the first time, if I recall what he said to me, is like that was the first time he had heard the gospel. And, you know, he was like, whoa, what is this? So I think, you know, this CBS cartoon, right? I think CBS was the network.
It was?
That's a crazy, like, especially in light of all the Colbert stuff, you know, all the things we're seeing, like this was aired on TV and it was a big deal for people who were watching it.
Yeah. And I have recently learned that, and this isn't in the essay, but I wish it could have been, that scene almost got cut because there were people who thought it was too religious and that it would be too controversial.
They would be right.
Apparently, baby boomers across the country were converting right there.
Oh, man.
I was just a very young baby boomer, just so your audience is perfectly clear.
Yeah, love it. You're a very hip baby boomer.
Well, I wouldn't want to say that. My daughter, who's a Gen Zer, she'd probably have a little extra comment on that regard. But you know, I don't embody some of the worst qualities of my generation.
You certainly do not. No, but I think that's such like, and I read that, and obviously that's, you know, wasn't the point of that whole chapter, but It was a really personal note that you put in there that I thought was so cool, and a reminder that, you know, sometimes we think, and I think those of us who are drawn to theology naturally get the criticism of others, like spend your time in the real world, you know, like get your head out of books. And I've always I just have loved these things. And then I look at other people and like, I'll start telling them like, let me tell you this idea I read in a book. And I can like, I'm at lunch telling a friend and I can see it in their eyes. Like they don't care, you know, like this is not, and it's like, all right, let's talk about something else. But I love when we realize like real life intersects these moments of our faith, and these things is like, oh, I was watching that and then that idea. And I just think it's a fun, good reminder, you know, for me. And you referenced my all-time favorite Christmas movie because you set up the original, you know, the big three from the 60s, but then you talk about A Muppet Christmas Carol in 1992, which I will go down fighting is the greatest Christmas movie ever made. We watch it every Christmas Eve. And I've done this for decades since I was a little kid. Now we do it with our kids. But I love it's like that story is so moving, not just because it's some great moment of Hollywood. It's because it taps into something deep, something beautiful inside of us, which I would say is like it's a reminder of what God is inviting us to experience in real life. And so I love that you talk about these Christmas movies, and again, this is where a lot of us, we get sentimental at Christmas time, and it's not quite Christmas time yet, but I just love it. And I thought for you to kick off your theological journey in Charlie Brown was pretty great.
That sounds like I had something in common with your dad.
Yeah. Yeah, and I remember him saying that was a big deal for him. And again, I didn't watch it live on TV, but I can look back now and go, that seems like a big deal, you know, especially with what I've seen, to say that was aired on, you know, national TV. Like, wow, that's straight up the gospel. You know, we're going to talk about this little baby that changes everything. And I think it's cool. All right, we'll stick on the Christmas theme for this next one, but obviously this is going to take us into some modern times here. You write this, and I just love this quote. What do we do when Herod is on the throne?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Be like the Magi, those ancient wise men. Do not obey in advance. Which I just wanted to like circle, highlight, underline. Discern deceit, trust the truth, be brave. Following a star means moving at night, and sometimes the night will be very dark indeed. This is about Herod, and this is not about Herod. And man, those are some poetically beautiful words that speak to a heartbreak we are witnessing right now. How would you elaborate on that for what we're witnessing around us?
Well, I hope that they do speak for themselves, and thank you for highlighting that. There's that essay in some ways was prompted by a song that is published in the form of the lyrics and the poem in the front of the Epiphany section. And it's by a friend of mine, Chris Grundy, excuse me, it's hard to say. And it's a song about taking a different way home, taking a different road home. And when I first heard his song, I was just overwhelmed by how vibrantly the story of the wise men connects with this moment in American politics. And so the essay that I wrote was sort of an homage and an integration of the insights that I had when I was listening to his song. Yeah, I have to go back and reread that part to myself most days, because the night is very deep right now, and you do not know, none of us know what the end of the road is, and there's literally only a star to follow.
I love though when we take these moments out of, this is Bible times, and that was for them. And you take these ideas and you go, no, they were people navigating times like we're navigating. Mm-hmm. And they had to figure out, what does it mean to be faithful? What does it mean to follow God? What is it, and they figured it out in their time. And now that, the baton passes to us, and we've got to figure out, what does it look like for us to be faithful? What does it look like, and again, there's so much in that one quote, which I feel like we could do an episode just on this quote, but the do not obey in advance. What I have been watching is seems like everybody in power, in all different aspects of power, are all obeying in advance right now. And so the most recent thing I was reading about this week was, Apple there's some way that people were reporting ICE agents of where they were. And Apple there's an app, or I don't remember all the details, but basically Apple removed it without ever, they weren't sued. it wasn't a big deal, but they just removed this. And it struck me when I read this article, I was like, that is obeying in advance. That is saying, hey, I'm not going to ruffle any feathers. We don't, rather than saying, what's the other way home that we can take? Now, again, I'm not necessarily expecting Apple to lead the way in that regard. However, when we're watching that example all around us of, the news outlets and the social media platforms, and we're just watching everybody obeying in advance, I think if we're not careful, then we think, well, a good Christian does the same thing, and we obey in advance and we fall in line, rather than realizing, no, we're invited into a much different story. Yeah. We are invited to follow the star, like you reference here. Like that's the invitation for us, which means we don't obey in advance. We don't fall in line with everybody else. And that almost feels so, I don't know, unpatriotic to people now, or even unchristian to a lot of, people in this environment. And yet you're inviting us back to see how the deeper story connects with our moment today. And I hope more people, especially if they read this throughout the year, as they lean into these different moments, these different seasons, start to connect. Oh, that is actually not so different than what I'm going through right now in my life.
Yeah, and that story of Herod and the wise men is really chilling. If you go back and you read the whole thing, Herod invites the wise men to come and have a dinner at the palace, as they're on their journey, and you can just imagine what's going on in Herod's head. He's buttering these guys up. He's trying to get information out of them. He wants to, sort of bribe them and get the stuff, find out where this king is who's going to take over his throne. And so, he just lies to their faces. He treats them like royalty, and tries to just make them feel great, like he's their buddy. And then he tries to get the information out of them, just, oh, tell me where, because I want to go worship him too.
Yeah.
Oh, what a great guy Herod is. He's a real Christian,
Yeah. He's the real deal.
He's the real deal. He just wants to be like the wise men. So, sure, Herod, we'll tell you. And then, I'm not totally convinced that they ever really believed any of that, because these guys were clearly smart enough in advance that they were already, pretty discerning types. They could read the signs of the world around them. And so I'm not sure that all of that manipulation, that emotional thing by getting invited to the White House, the palace,
Freudian slip,
would have had any impact on them. But then, of course, God makes the point pretty clear by sending this dream and saying, don't, pay no attention to the man on the throne. Instead, do something different. And they hear the dream clearly, and they follow that. And so one of the things I always wanted to sort of ask people who want to obey in situations like this, because they've been reading Romans 13, it's like every government has been given by God, and your job is to be obedient. I always want to say, well, hey, what about those wise men? What about King Herod? Can you explain that on the basis of this obedience theology you have to government? Because if the wise men would have obeyed Herod, what would have happened then? And God clearly told them, disobey Herod, yeah, sure. And I'm not even convinced that God thought that Herod was a legitimate governor of ancient Judea, because literally that guy had been put on, his whole line had been put on the throne by Mark Antony, the same Mark Antony who is in ancient Roman history, who is a friend of Julius Caesar's. The only reason that guy was the king was because a Roman emperor basically put him up as a puppet king in order to control the Jews. And so not every government is legitimate. And you can even look at the Hebrew Bible and see that. There are governments of Israel itself that are illegitimate. So to take that one passage in Romans and lift that up and say, oh yeah, you always have to obey the government, that is absolutely ridiculous, because it's not even sensible within biblical interpretation. If the principle that the Bible can interpret itself, it doesn't stand up.
Yeah.
It just doesn't stand up. And so look, these stories about the people who can see through false pretenses of power and can see through the manipulations of human politics, I think these are really valuable stories right now.
I absolutely agree. And it also made me, as you were talking, think of like the Hebrew midwives, who didn't follow Pharaoh. And like, these are the stories that we have inherited. And yet somehow we've neutered them and like, no, that's not what it means. And I almost wonder, it's like, as I read that story today, I go, is it because the Magi were foreigners that they were able to see through, like, okay, this whole thing, there's no way. And is it just so much harder to see it when it's your own leadership? And I wonder, like,
that's a great
maybe
question.
I don't know.
I love that. That would be a great sermon.
Yeah. That's what I want to, like, shake my fellow Christians in America and go, why can you not see it? And they just can't. And, I'm at the point where it's like, I don't know. Like, I don't know what could convince you or what could show you or what you would have to see at this point to be able to see things that to me are so blaringly obvious. And yet, you have these moments where, again, the Magi don't seem in danger at any point of falling for this, and you're like, yes, that was great. But there's not a lot of Magi examples today that I'm seeing. It's a lot more of people going, oh, Herod invited me in. Do you see what he fed me? And let me tell you what he told me. And it's like, what?
Yeah.
What? Like when I saw the worship lineup for the Charlie Kirk Memorial, and it was like big dog names, Chris Tomlin and all these people, like these are the worship leaders in the church. And I just went, we've all gone that way. And I mean, not obviously we all, but the majority has. And you just go, so when I read this story of Herod, I'm like, I want that. I want that story back.
Yeah, there's a piece that I don't write about, obviously, in this book, because this is just a bit more of a historical piece. My tradition as what's known as mainline Protestantism made a huge mistake in the 20th century by associating itself too closely with elite institutions and government and power. And eventually that association, believing ourselves to, in effect, being the state church, that eventually almost destroyed all of those churches. It wasn't the fact that we had liberal theology. It was the fact that we had swallowed the pills of power and that we could never quite get over not being in charge. And so I for years, I would show up at events. For much of my early career, I was working with mainline clergy to help them renew their congregations. And I would hear people say things like, oh gosh, if only Reinhold Niebuhr were on the cover of Time magazine again, everything would be fixed. Or they would moan and groan about the fact that their pastor, the Lutheran pastor, hadn't been invited to the city hall meeting to pray before the council vote, but instead some Pentecostal pastor had. And it was like, oh, nobody pays any attention to us. We have no voice in the public square. And it was like, oh, what do you expect? You're Christians.
Yeah.
It's like, honestly, if you look at most of the tradition, the powerful voices, the truest theologies come from the people who have no power. And just because my folks, for 100 years or so in American history, imbibed the power of the throne, as it were, it doesn't mean it was right. And it doesn't mean you necessarily even did a particularly good job with it. And that's it. And fundamentalists and Pentecostals got really jealous about that. And then they wanted it. And once mainliners kind of got pushed out of the picture and relegated to some sideline of American history, evangelicals willingly went in and drank from that cup.
Yeah.
And every mainliner in this country knows that's a mistake. At least the honest ones do. It will be the death of that form of the church. And someday, 100 years from now, you'll be looking back at that moment and saying, oh, that was the wrong thing to do. And now we've got to fix it because we ruined everything. We ruined who we really were. We ruined our capacity to follow Jesus. We brainwashed our own people into thinking that the power of the state was God's power. And I mean, I tell you, it's a brutal and long recovery process from getting drunk on that kind of power. I call it the establishment hangover of mainline Protestantism as I drink my wine.
Yeah.
But mainliners still think that, part of the problem of America is we're not in charge anymore. And it's like, no. There's an entirely different political vision that is present in the Gospels, and we made a mistake. We chose the wrong road earlier, and we're busily trying to choose a better road now. And, evangelicals are now making that mistake. Doesn't make it more comfortable for the rest of us, but that's
since happening. Constantine, we've been making that mistake.
Yeah, it really is.
Long mistake.
It is. It's the Constantinian mistake. And one time evangelicals had no illusions about that being a mistake. I remember being a teenager in evangelical churches, and they would criticize being too close to power, and they would criticize people whose agendas were more political than they were spiritual. And that was part of their critique against the mainline when I was much younger. And so there was a clarity there, especially with Baptists, and I think some forms of free church people, that they sold their soul for pottage. That mostly happened with Ronald Reagan in the 1980s. So these are things that I write about on another basis that aren't necessarily in A Beautiful Year, but these are the sort of shaping ideas of history and theology that have impacted what you see on the page in front of you in a book like A Beautiful Year. So that I have a very strong historical sense, and I also have, I think that from the experience of living these decades and being a Christian on sort of both sides of the aisle, both mainline and evangelical, and then so coming back to my mainline roots, has given me a different kind of perspective on scripture, on spirituality, on ritual, on practice, and on the relationship between religion and politics. And so I'm always trying to turn that around and offer that up as friendship and guidance for anybody who might be looking for a different way.
Well, you certainly offer a lot in your writings for a lot of people to find hope and find something more beautiful, more truthful. And that's why it's fun. I mean, it's fun that we can't even stay on one topic because you have so many, ways you can go with all these ideas. Like, well, I was wrote about that book or that book or that. And it's like, that just comes out in your writing. And I think, if anybody hasn't read one of your books yet, here's my hearty endorsement. Go buy one of these books because it will invite you into things that you probably haven't heard before or haven't heard in this way. And it's just it's an invitation to drink of a different cup than the cup that is getting passed around in our culture. And yeah, I think it will lead to something much more beautiful than what we're experiencing.
I really appreciate that. It's a funny thing to write a book called A Beautiful Year in this really hellish, hellish year. Now, yeah. All of my friends are writing books on...
What is she talking about?
That's right. All of my friends are writing books on fascism and authoritarianism and Christian nationalism.
The end is near. Diana Butler Bass. It's beautiful,
It's a beautiful year.
Oh, that's great.
And there are flowers on the cover. And
yeah.
So, maybe we all need to stop and spend some time in a garden.
Well, one of the encouragements, because I get a lot of people messaging me, and they feel the heaviness, they feel the weight, they feel the despair, and it's like, do you have any encouragement? And one of the go-to encouragements I give people is each day focus on creating something beautiful. And when the world is ugly, you want to throw in the towel, you want to just say this is the way it is. But as believers, we're invited to bring heaven to earth, bring a little bit of beauty each and every day. And if all of us did that, if we just brought a little bit of beauty each and every day, I think that's a snowball, and that creates momentum, that creates something. And that gives Jesus a chance, to partner with us in unmaking the things that are and making new things. And your writings certainly do that. And I'm very excited for people to get to read this throughout the year, to engage with these ideas in real time as you wrote them in real time. I mean, I just think that's such a cool premise, and it'll be fun to watch this play out as people have a chance to, because again, it'll take a year from the release for this to really play out, but it'll be cool to see all the ripple effects of that.
I'm really looking forward to that. It's really a pleasure to share it in this format, because it's one thing to send out a newsletter and have people respond, and then it is kind of another thing to gather it together and put a cover around it and say, keep this by your bedside, and to have that tactile experience of a book and going back and looking at the words on a page. And so there is a sort of fundamental beauty in book reading that we forget about, I think, sometimes in our age of quickness on the internet. And I hope that people will, both find the words I put on the internet life-giving, but particularly this project, to feel a sense of beauty with you, I think is a really significant way of, I don't know if I want to say fighting back, but responding with a capacity of grace in these really, really, things are truly frightening, and people are rightly worried and fearful. And so we all need to find some way of being our best selves in the middle of all this, because that's one of the things that's going to make a difference too.
Yeah. I love that. All right, we're going to wrap this up. I have some questions that I like to ask each guest, and then we get to compare your answers to everybody else's, and we'll see where you take it. So the first one's a wine question. You can go anywhere with this you want. If I were to ask you, you may not be a super wino, but if you can think of one memory that you think that was the best glass of wine I ever had in my life, is there a story that comes to mind? Is it a bottle? Is it a location? Is it who you were with? Does any memory stir up if I say, can you just recall to me, like, that was the greatest glass of wine I ever had? What comes to your mind?
What comes to mind instantly was the year I got fired from teaching at an evangelical college, and I was finding myself differently in the world. And a friend of mine took me to the Santa Barbara Wine Festival, which that particular time was held at the Santa Barbara Museum of Natural History, which is this beautiful museum under live oak trees in a pretty rural part of at the edge of the city of Santa Barbara. And under these oak trees, there were all these tables set up, and there were vintners from all over the county serving up their wines, and there was music being played, and the weather was perfect, and it was just complete and utter sensual joy of nature, joy of the grape, and the whole sense of a different kind of community. And I walked up to this one table, and it was, I don't remember the vineyard, but I would be able to recall it if I kind of thought about it long enough and saw a map of the vineyards in Santa Barbara County. But they were serving a Chardonnay, and I took a taste of it. It was a reserve Chardonnay, and it was an absolute revelation of what wine could be. It was the best sip of wine I'd ever had in my life. And I bought a bottle of it. It was very expensive, and I didn't have a whole lot of money at that time because I was out of a job. And I took it to an Easter dinner later on with some friends of mine who loved wine. And they opened the bottle, and the husband, who was a real gourmand in this way, he smelled the cork, and then he took a taste, and he said, "This is the very best wine I've ever had, very best Chardonnay I've ever had." He said, "How in the world did you pick it?"
Wow.
And I picked it in a moment of such loss and sorrow and feeling like I was never going to have anything ever to say again in the world, and that I didn't know what my life was going to be in the future. I had picked that wine and tasted that wine at what was the lowest part of my life. And yet, for some reason, that sip of wine became the opening to what might be in the future. That life would be joyful and sweet.
That is a heck of a story. What an answer to that question, Diana.
You asked. That's it.
I've gotten some good answers to that one. That was really good. I like that answer a lot. Okay, I'm excited for your answer to this one. Which member of church history would you trust to pick a bottle of wine for you?
Oh.
And who would you not trust, and why?
Oh my gosh. I don't think I would trust Martin Luther because he is so much more of a beer guy.
He comes up more than anybody on this answer, okay? So you go, Martin Luther is your no.
Yeah, he would be my no. Who would be my yes? That one's a little tougher. I think for some reason Hildegard of Bingen is coming to mind.
Okay.
Hildegard of Bingen. She loved nature. She kept gardens. She could do anything. She was kind of a, Renaissance woman. I think I would trust her to pick a bottle of wine. And she lived in the Rhine Valley. So
there you go.
She'd probably have a better sense of it.
All right. I like it. What is something you used to believe that it turned out later you were wrong about?
How many things did I used to believe that I was wrong about? Oh. Okay, the number one thing is that I was once the Teenage Republican of the Year for the state of Arizona. And
The what? Teenage Republican?
I was the Teenage Republican of the Year in
I didn't know that was a thing.
in 1976 for the state of Arizona. And I have a personal letter from Barry Goldwater congratulating me on my ideological purity and my commitment to the Republican Party. I have to have another drink at that one.
Wow.
I've had quite a political journey. So that's definitely one thing that
I live in Arizona, and I didn't even know that was a thing.
Oh my gosh. Oh, well, there you have it. What a connection that we have there. Yeah, I was actually the president of the state Teenage Republican group, which encompassed all the high school chapters of the Teenage Republicans. And that was in 1976. And I worked for the campaign that year against Jimmy Carter, much to my despair. And then was honored for that work by Barry Goldwater.
What would you say to that version of you?
I would say, oh, Diana, you've always been so idealistic. and that's a good thing, but be careful where you put the idealism sometimes.
Yeah. I love that.
I do love that, Diana. She was very idealistic. I still am that way.
What do you see as the main issues facing Christianity in America today?
Oh my gosh, the complete corruption of it by current political trends. And it doesn't mean that Christianity can never be political. I do think that Christianity is always sort of at its heart political. It says something about the polis, about the way we're supposed to live together in community. So I don't think it's an apolitical thing. But when it is threaded in with pyramid-shaped structures of power and hierarchy in which certain groups are privileged and other groups are outcast, then it always winds up being corrupted. And that's a problem. And it is a real problem that people are falling in love with hierarchy all over again for some reason in this age, when hierarchy has proved itself through history and through the Bible. Look at it, every time a pyramid-shaped structure of power shows up, it's always a disaster in the Bible. And so it's not like we don't know that kings are bad. We know this. We
still want them, though.
I know, it is one of the most proved facts of human history and civilization. And yet, no, let's crown the current party guy a king. And it's like, are you crazy? I mean, literally, have you ever stopped and read really one moment of history and seen that that's a bad idea? And Christianity has loved supporting that for some really unfathomable reason, and it's always been a disaster.
You know what, though? I find myself talking a lot about Bonhoeffer these days, and a lot of parallels, and a lot of, what was he working through, what was going on there. And people who know that history cannot, it's like they can't see, like, well, why this is different than that, And I look at it and I just go, I'm perplexed by this. And I had someone the other day, I had posted something about Bonhoeffer, I don't remember what it was, and someone said, I wonder what Bonhoeffer would think about what's going on right now in America. And I said, my guess is Bonhoeffer would be like, really? You guys got back into this mess this fast? Like, I think he'd probably be shocked. Like, you didn't learn anything, from like what played out in Germany? Like, you're back at this within a couple generations? I mean, like, that to me, but yes, I can't understand this stuff.
Yeah, I was actually in Europe a couple times this past year, and there was this one trip, part of the trip, I was talking to these two guys. One was from South Africa, the other one was from Basque region of Spain, and they were asking me a lot of questions about American politics. And when the fellow from South Africa finally just looked at me and he said, so you all fought the Nazis and now you are the Nazis? And I went,
Basically sums it up. Yeah.
I went, oh, I'm so sorry. I said, really, I didn't do this. It's not my fault. I don't understand it either. But really, having some guy who's in his like late 20s on a street in Europe just saying, so you guys fought the Nazis and now you are the Nazis. That's the impression the Europeans have of us right now. It's like, that is not good.
Well, and rightly so. I mean,
Right.
he's calling out the obvious.
Yeah, he was. He was a really smart guy. And I was just going, oh, this is so tragic. So, and, you know, that's, yeah. So I get it.
That's why we drink, Diana. That's why we drink good wine. All right. What's something blowing your mind right now? What are you learning?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I've really got my mind blown by AI. And it's easy to fear new technologies. And I think that, you know, there's plenty of reason to be afraid of AI. But I also think about most new technologies in world history have had bad results, but they've also had some extraordinary ones. And a friend of mine who's theologian and trained in science, teaches at Villanova. She's a nun. Ilia Delio is her name, and she's very well related to different people in the Vatican, and she's regarded highly. She's very enthusiastic about AI and artificial intelligence as an expression of the image of God, and how we humans have invented this thing. And so what will it aid in the future? How can we bring it to its best conclusions? And so I think that's kind of got me thinking. So I would say that my mind isn't like, you know, blown in the sense of an instant revelation, but it has me pondering to move past just the presentations of this technology in the media and ask some deeper questions of it.
Well, hey, everybody. At this point in the episode, for some reason, my camera and my audio stopped recording. So I've never had that happen before. It kept recording for Diana. So what I'm going to do for these last few questions, I'm going to add in the question. I'll just read it. You can see her response. I'll cut out any of the dialogue that we had about it, but at least you get the essence of what she said. And this one will end a little bit more abruptly than most of our other episodes. So here's the end of it. What's a problem you're trying to solve?
Main problem that I'm trying to solve. Living forever. Since I'm in my 60s, I just like going, oh my gosh, I've only got a couple of decades left. And it's really weird and different being a little older. And so that's okay. Try not to think of it as a problem to be solved, but as a gift to experience. That's kind of where I am with that. It's a weird moment in one's life cycle. And so I think I guess I'm trying to deproblematize aging as a problem and really enjoy my life in a deeply problematic moment in history.
What are you excited about right now?
Oh gosh. I am so excited about my daughter being in law school. She's an amazing human being. I admire her so much, and I just always am blown. My mind is blown that I have such a cool daughter. And so she went off to law school, and I said, as she was leaving, well, honey, I hope that by the time you graduate, there's still law. And she looks at me and she said, Mom, you don't understand. And I said, what do you mean I don't understand? She said, when we all get out, we're going to rewrite the things that you all messed up. And I went, whoa, that's optimistic. And so I think I'm really excited about that. I'm excited about the fact that, stories don't end when generations move to the sidelines or when they die, but instead new generations of really interesting and wonderful people come to the fore, and that the dreams that they bring and the gifts and the enthusiasms and the passions for the future that they bear are life-giving. And I get sad when people who are my age only look out and see despair and don't see the enthusiasm and the excitement and the possibility that rests with youngest adults in the world right now.
Is there anything you want to add that I haven't already asked you about?
Oh my gosh, you've asked such great questions. I really can't think of anything else. And I even told you that I was Teenage Republican of the Year in 1976 for the state of Arizona. What else do you want? Well, anyone can change. Oh my gosh. Well, I think that maybe that's the thing to add, is that life is a story we're always writing. And, I bring that approach to all of my work as a historian, as a sort of cultural critic, and also as a person who loves the tradition, who actually, I'm happy, I'm glad I'm a Christian. And that's I write a book called A Beautiful Year, and I say, I'm glad I'm a Christian. And so, so I am such a contrarian. And yet I am a contrarian because I'm always on a quest. I'm always on a quest to understand more deeply and see further. And I think also there is this kind of innate quest that has been harder for me, I think, than some people, and that is to find joy and gratitude in every single day. And I don't do that naturally, but I'm learning more and more to live by those things as that star that takes me down a different road. So yeah. So I would really encourage people right now to not get caught up completely in the despair and the depression of the moment. And wherever you are on this pathway, it is okay, because you're going to be somewhere different probably tomorrow. and so there should be no judgment of the road you are on. And I just encourage people to be open to where the road might be. So if the right stars are leading you, you're going to get to some place that's surprising and wonderful, and will change you and might actually change the world.
How can people find you online?
Well, the best possible way is to sign up for my Substack newsletter. It's called The Cottage. And, just Google it or go to my website, which is just my name, dianabutlerbass.com, and you can sign up that way. And then you get to hear from me once or twice a week. Last night, I sent out an emergency Substack at 11 o'clock at night Eastern time, and it was about the guy in the chicken suit at the protest in Portland, Oregon, because I loved the chicken suit, and I just wanted to hold up to people the power of humor in protest, and that the good folks out there in Portland who are, they're as weird, maybe even weirder than the people in Austin, dressing like frogs, unicorns, and chickens when the National Guard is coming down on your back is actually a really good idea. Yeah, when Kristi Noem showed up, I don't know if you saw that. She took a video crew up to the top of the ice building and, wanted the crew to survey the scene where all the violence has been. And it was completely empty. So, yeah, it was a few protesters holding up upside down American flags, and then the guy in the chicken suit. And somebody in her team actually had the guts to ask her, well, what do you think of the guy in the chicken suit? And she just said, I didn't see him. I was like, oh yeah, right. I thought of Scarlett O'Hara in an old line in Gone with the Wind, who said, you are such a cool liar, Melly Wilkes. That's what I was thinking. You are such a cool liar, Christy Gnome. So yeah, I don't know what got me to the chicken soup, but there we have it. So I write about all kinds of things, from chicken suits to Christian nationalism to the Bible every Sunday. And yeah, the Bible stuff always surprises people as much as the chicken suit posts do. Well, thank you, and thanks for encouraging me to do a little day drinking.